Due to technical difficulties, the Barnstable County Commissioners meeting of February 23rd, the opening was not recorded, including the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence, following which Commissioner Lyons read from some prepared remarks, which she has agreed to recreate for us on the 24th, following which the meeting will continue in its entirety. Commissioner Lyons.
Thank you. What I am reading is the cover letter that went with the white paper that was issued in regards to the Vegetation Risk Analysis Ad Hoc Committee. To whom it may concern, the proposed use of herbicides and pesticides on NSTAR's right-of-way to manage vegetation has raised important questions regarding the consistency of these practices and the protection of our drinking water supply on Cape Cod. The Barnstable County Commissioners appointed an ad hoc committee on risk analysis vegetation management practices on Cape Cod. The committee asked to review the current regulatory review program and to develop recommendations for short-term and long-term strategies to reduce or eliminate vegetation management practices that may pose a threat to the Cape Cod drinking water, the public health, and the environment. A broad range of stakeholders were invited to participate. The committee reviewed and discussed the existing federal and state scientific review and regulatory procedures, subsurface transport, health impacts, and organic landscaping alternatives. The following white paper outlines the work done by the committee. Acting to the fullest extent of our authority, Barnstable County and the Cape Cod Commission negotiated a one-year moratorium on herbicide spraying last January. This gave the Commission an opportunity to work with NSTAR to map existing private and public wells within the utility's rights-of-way using the best available information and technology available. This white paper outlines potential next steps to build on the work already done to protect our drinking water, and more work remains. There is no current regional or local authority to ban the substances discussed by the committee. It became evident contributions of herbicides come from many sources. It is clear that more study and public education is necessary. Over the coming weeks, stakeholders should use this work to develop a specific plan to identify, monitor, and reduce herbicide and pesticide use on Cape Cod. All committee presentations, documents, and minutes to the meeting can be found at barnstablecounty.org. The white paper is a presentation giving a background of the Cape, that we are faced with a threat to a single aquifer that we rely on for our drinking water. And towns across the Cape have been forced to support a resolution asking NSTAR to, have been faced with a request asking NSTAR to stop the practice of spraying herbicides along their rights-of-way. Our mission was to develop recommendations for long-term and short-term strategies to reduce or eliminate vegetation management practices, including chemical and mechanical applications that are not known to be safe for the drinking water of Cape Cod. Their members came from a group of, the members of this committee were representing the Department of Agricultural Resources, the Department of Environmental Protection, the Farmers Bureau, the Cape Cod Golf Association, landscaping associations, the Cape Cod Cooperative Extension, the Natural Resource Conservation District, and as well as Green Cape and Cape Cod for a Truly Green NSTAR, and mosquito control representatives, state representatives, and representatives of the Barnstable County Commissioners. And if you want to go further on this, you can see that there were many presentations done, and that really there were, on this paper it says the following items were presented and or discussed. And generally in the discussions of these items that you will read under that title on page 2, there's additional these are more recommendations of future considerations, as are the motions that were not accepted. So with that, I started my presentation to the commissioners. I believe that there's more discussion that follows after you listen to that part of it. And you can find all of those documents, again, at barnstablecounty.org.
And I guess now, if you would, Sheila, you were the chair of the committee, what are your recommendations?
Well, you know, there's good news and bad news out of this, and I guess I'll start with the bad news. The bad news is that there was one motion passed that has gotten all the attention, and that is the one that basically states, motion number 5, that said that they support the vegetation management practice of NSTAR as put forward. That was in light of looking at many of the regulatory processes that they have to go through, that the NSTAR has about 4 regulatory boards that it has to answer to and tailor its management plan to satisfy. Their vegetation management plan that was developed, I think, about 3 or 4 years ago, NSTAR's vegetation management plan, stemmed from them being counseled by Department of Natural Resources and others that mechanical cutting was more detrimental to the environment because it had a negative impact on habitats, species, and endangered species of flora and fauna. So they developed this plan. The premise of their plan is that they cut, they spray, and each year they spray less and manage this to let the undergrowth, natural undergrowth, come under the power lines so that mechanical and herbicide spraying is less. As I say, the negative, the sad part about that is that motion has gotten all of the attention, and in some ways it's a distraction from the work that was done by the committee. Because prior to that, there were very good recommendations based on all of the testimony put forward. There was a lot of discussion over these, and basically what they recommend is that a committee be formed or a study be done to look at the overall impact of chemical use on the Cape. It is clear that if you took NSTAR out of the picture, and if NSTAR wasn't spraying, we still have a problem here on Cape Cod, because chemical application is conducted by everyone from commercial farming, as stated in the report, to municipalities and the individual homeowner who isn't under strict guidelines that licensed applicators are. So that is something that I do believe that every licensed applicator has to file a report at the end of the year of what they sprayed, how much they sprayed, where they sprayed it. So it would be nice to start to compile, have an overall view of what the total impact is and what are ways, not to have gotchas on any town or any individual, but to have an overall impact. They also recommended that we write a letter to EPA respectfully asking that that the chemicals that are being used by NSTAR be updated and re-reviewed. They try to update these about every 10 to 15 years. Funding and other things are slowing that process down. And it was even acknowledged that more and more information is coming forward about the chemicals, not just the chemicals themselves, but what is called the surfactant qualities of them, which are the added elements to help them be absorbed or be effective. Those compounds might have more of a threat to personal health than even the chemicals themselves. So a lot is not known on that. We are encouraging that those studies go forward. And if you look at the EPA website, they are bringing up those issues. They're beginning to recognize that there is an assault on endocrine systems of the human body and others. So they are now expanding their research into that area, but it's not completed yet. And this is just to encourage that to happen. And to, as I say, establish a subcommittee to do further studies. And the recommendations that are here, in the paper, there is a list of items that were presented and or discussed. Many of them were, it was agreed upon in some ways that these things should be done, whether NSTAR complies, does not comply. These are good steps forward to have more comprehensive review. We should have a monitoring of the groundwater resources, minimize the adverse impact on, with the eye of minimizing impact on rare species habitat, vegetation management, from necessary, well, that is the statement. There was a lot of, I think the temperature of people in that room were, we cannot use herbicides ever, to they are a tool in a toolbox for people to manage vegetation management. So there was a spectrum of opinion in the room to reassess the vegetation management, so to reduce chemical use. So we are always encouraging utilities and others to do this. Impacts of vegetation management, we have to study even further the impacts on our drinking water and on the human health and environmental impacts. And we also have to consider economic impacts. Even if and we discussed this last year with the Cape Cod Commission about looking at a DCPC, and number one, we didn't know if that would really, if we had the authority to do it on utilities. And we could have a DCPC that would impact everyone but utilities, because they are given this federal dispensation. So that wasn't really a very good way to go, and you could put the economies that depend on this. There's many people with their landscaping, just the name Camelon kind of gives you an idea, and I don't mean to do a trade name, but those are things that we have to look at, and what are those ingredients. And just to do a ban could stop that economic activity of many people, farmers, landscaping. And it goes on. We do feel that there should be more of an analysis and come up with best practices of vegetation management. We encourage a further setback on water supplies from utilities and others. An increased setback on surface water bodies. To look closely at the contaminant migration in Cape Cod soils, alternative vegetation techniques, including physical, hand cutting, and natural processes that could,
Is that what cultural means?
Cultural means, yes. Proposed vegetation management plans to minimize impact to health. So these are things that we think that needs further study. Ours was a committee that, in retrospect, if I was going to take something like this on, I would ask for staff and I would ask for some money to be able to guide that process and have someone, if there was something we needed to look at, we would have that money to make that charge to a consultant or to a group to do that study. Nevertheless, I think that these are very good steps forward. As I say, it's unfortunate that number 5 got all of the attention and not that the recommendations, and they are only recommendations, they are not a thumbs up or a thumbs down. It was really an attitude of the committee in light of the material that was presented. Now, there was another motion put forward by Mr. Kukunis, who happens to be here today, and there were 3 motions put forward by Sue Phelan of Green Cape. They were not accepted, but they are to be thought of, and we want them included in the white paper so that if a committee is going forward, they look at these issues.
Okay, that's your recommendation to us.
And that is my recommendation as well, to keep these in mind and to consider them as a charge to the next committee. There is a lot of information from an endocrine society. That information was given to us. It wasn't discussed at length. People did not feel comfortable in passing that motion, but it is definitely does have worthwhile information and can help guide a process. And as you can see, there's others here, and I don't have my glasses on, so I can't see in light of That is the record. That is the answer.
It might help you all.
Where are you?
Knowing further. And it really does speak to particular herbicides that are used. That was number 1. Number 2 was about the Endocrine Society. And number 3 was for us to sign on to the motion that is being put forward between the towns. And there was a comment by one of the members that now you're asking us to get political. And they did view that as a political statement and not one that was based on the findings of the committee. And so they refrained from doing that. I do think that in some ways it has become political. Many boards of selectmen will readily sign on to this, and who wouldn't? We all agree that we don't want herbicides in our water if we can help it, and the more we can manage to have the least amount there is better. However, after seeing this committee, after being part of the committee, you can see that there are many elements to consider. We want further study on these elements. It will take some money. It will take effort. I think that we're discussing, how we would proceed, and I think I will leave it at that. I have Paul Niedzwiecki here.
Excuse me, Pat. Do you have any questions?
Yes, I'm open to questions at this point.
I have lots of questions, but one of the things that was mentioned by one of the presenters who did soil samples in Carver, and he was saying that the type of application used by NSTAR, which is the backpack spraying only to invasive species, that in Carver they didn't see any penetration of the soils that came anywhere near the water supply. And I just wondered if any of that kind of testing has been done on the Cape.
Some of that
because our soils obviously have to be different from Carver, because we're in a wholly different situation.
Was it in the town of Carver, or was it the Carver sand that we had here? It's
the Carver sand,
Okay.
and it was done on
What
very
does that
similar.
mean?
So we have what's called Carver sand.
We have Carver sand.
Yes, and there was a whole education on the types of soil and
so it wasn't
its density.
The town of Carver.
So it wasn't the town. I think
it's a type of
soil.
Soil.
It's evident
so
in
I know a
several
lot of
places in
people
the country and
do
around the
refer
world.
to that, and in our own health department backs that up from what their findings. Now, of course, instrumentation changes. If you don't see it, that means it's not there, and that is where the question lies. We're putting forward that we get more sophisticated in our budget this year, instrumentation to help us with this problem. And there is from what the scientists told us from the Department of Agriculture, many of these chemicals degrade as they are absorbed in the soil, so that by the time they come down into our drinking water supply, they are trace elements, if any element at all. That is the statement that is stated to us. Also, they felt that there are standards, there are limits of what is an acceptable concentration of these chemicals. And NSTAR was quick to point out that not only do they go within that guideline, their concentrations are much less. I think that they are making very good effort to do what they can to have the least amount of impact, but they still use this as a tool. There was a discussion on them stopping herbicide altogether, and they just felt that even if that was a goal for them not to use them at all, they still need them available as a tool in the toolbox. And that was demonstrated by Tim Simmons, who did the last presentation. Tim Simmons is a specialist from the Department of Natural Resources. He worked from the state level. And he worked on this vegetation management plan with NSTAR because they were the ones that were pushing that mechanical was more detrimental to the environment. And he gave the example of he came across a very tough situation of an endangered species that was being destroyed by Phragmites. on the Mass Pike in a water estuary. So he tried all kinds of different natural methods to do this problem, and after much trial and no success, he had to resort to chemical application. And he said there are times that you have to, because there are vegetation, invasive species that aren't even native here that will take over other vegetation and destroy it. And we will, you have to balance our what we see here as natural habitats and how other vegetation can destroy that. So there are times that you have to use these, but it should be your last resort.
Okay, illegal immigration enters
the
plant.
But it should be your last resort. They were all very interesting and educational presentations. It gave you a broad view of the complexity of the situation. It's not easy. Yes, we all want the same thing. How we're going to get there is...
Okay. What's not clear is when you say we all want the same thing, what is that same thing?
Well, we want to have safe water, drinking water, and we want to feel that it is not impacting our health in a negative way. So I do think that it is our role, we've had this discussion about roles. Everybody has different roles, and I do think, and I commend Green Cape, and I stated this to them when they felt the need to resign because of this white paper, but it is their persistence and their focus on this issue that has brought it to the forefront. It brought it to the forefront for me. I listened to the arguments, and then as it got my attention, I started as a county commissioner and as a regional county commissioner. I started to see that there were many people, there were many sources of chemical application into our water system. So if we really want to do something in a substantial way, we have to take a look at the comprehensive view and have a comprehensive review of this. Last year we were able to negotiate a year moratorium with NSTAR, and that was to map the vegetation rights of way, and I think I would like to have Paul come and speak to that. That mapping is pretty much different. And I'm here for questions as we go forward.
And Paul, please come forward. As we talk to Paul, there are elements and resources that exist within the county, not the least of which is the fact that we have a water quality department, or a department within the Cape Cod Commission that has the capability of doing a certain level of analysis, monitoring, perhaps not the development of pure science. We also have the AmeriCorps organization. Well, right now we do.
Yeah, right now we do.
AmeriCorps has charged with the responsibility of developing support, and in the beginning, because I was there at the beginning, developing management strategies for environmental protection in the places where they were assigned. And perhaps, looking at how do you stretch resources, perhaps this is an opportunity to incorporate the AmeriCorps kids who have, some background in environmental protection into into an extension of your resources. So with that, you've had an opportunity to look at the white paper, and I'd like to find out, if we didn't create a committee, could the Cape Cod Commission, this is a personal question, could the Cape Cod Commission assume let's say the responsibility and has the ability to carry forth what I would call an ongoing, sustained, comprehensive evaluation of the impact of these materials on Cape Cod?
Well, the mapping process is almost complete. Of all the rights of way, there are only about 65 households that we didn't get permission to come on the property and identify private drinking water supplies. But we've identified most of the private drinking water supplies. Public drinking water supplies are known. So we have much more confidence in the maps that NSTAR is using as they move forward. And that was really our charge, and took a lot of staff time and a lot of resources in order to execute that last year. So that process is done now. The ad hoc white paper is out. But it's still the beginning of a process. And
Now,
if it-
when you're referring to the ad hoc white paper, you're talking about this one?
Yeah,
Yes.
that is available so people can see what the result of the subcommittee discussions were. But that's still really sort of the beginning of the process. I mean, I think if people's expectations were that the county in any way was going to do some original scientific evaluation of a risk analysis of chemicals, that was really unrealistic. I mean, in a sense, there are federal and state agencies that do that. Now, we can work with those agencies to make sure that some of the scientific concerns we have, the combination of certain chemicals, are analyzed in the future. But it's not something I think we have the capacity at the county to do.
It brings up a question that, that has been troubling for me. We have the ability, and we have, to stop a retail establishment from putting things on their shelf that we deem to be hazardous because it is in a water recharge area. To me, that implies that we have the ability to regulate the use of identified hazardous materials. And as a follow-on to that question, I didn't see anything in here that indicated what the effect was of the combination of any of these materials. So, and my concern comes from, if I were doing something with regard to dosage, with regard to a medication, if I discovered that the medication wasn't working, practice suggests that that medication be taken out of your system before another one was used because of the unknown effect of the two working together. So I believe that that might have a carryover or an analogy to what we're looking at here.
Well, we have the ability to certainly look at hazardous materials that are introduced really anywhere on the Cape. But we don't define what those hazardous materials are. We look to other state and federal agencies that have defined those as hazardous materials. That's the problem with what we're doing here, is that NSTAR is proposing to do something that's completely sanctioned by the same authorities we would look to for those definitions. So we would be in the position of having to create more stringent definitions or standards of hazardous materials, and they would have no effect on implementation until the appropriate state and federal agencies had agreed with that analysis.
We have information with regard to MSDS, sheets that that identify what different concentrations of materials, and I would suggest to you that even good materials, if used in, let's say, in an inappropriate level of concentration in an area, could have a very, very
well,
important
I agree
effect.
with you. I mean, I think the abuse of even sanctioned chemicals would be something that we could take action against. And so I think the larger discussion we have to have is comprehensive. How many chemicals are we putting on the ground and in our neighborhoods on an annual basis, and how much of it is needed? And then we could set regional goals for the reduction of these chemicals to a reasonable level. I think that falls short of eliminating all of these chemicals. I mean, we would have a significant problem with Phragmites if we looked at sort of.
What is Phragmites, so people could know?
It's an invasive species, tall, waterborne structure that comes out and chokes out everything else in an existing sort of open surface water body. So I think the responsible thing to do, and the thing where DCP sees in some of the county tools that we have, and not only at the Cape Cod Commission, but the capacity of county health department, would be in trying to establish some of this aggregate comprehensive information of how much we use on an annual basis, and try to derive regional policies that are aimed at a reduction over time. And I think we could significantly reduce, through education, outreach, and regulation, the chemicals that we use on an annual basis. The problem, and I've brought this up before, is if we look at comprehensively, there are organizations like NSTAR and like the Cape Cod Railroad that have federal preemption that would make it difficult for us to regulate them directly. But that doesn't mean we couldn't regulate, for example, homeowners. So, what we've done is the monitoring. I think we need to take the next step. But we have to keep in mind that that the law applies equally to everyone. And, that we're bound by that duty and obligation. And I think it would be perilous in some respects for the county to lead people to believe that we have the capacity to do the kind of scientific multi-year, million-dollar scientific analysis to look at the effect of permutations of different chemicals on particular soils. That doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be done. It doesn't mean that we can't advocate that it be done. But it is, I think, an unrealistic expectation that the county would take that on. Now, there are other methods that we can look at, such as quantifying and aggregating this information and coming up with real, achievable, measurable reductions in the amount of chemicals that we use. Because I guarantee you, Cape-wide, we use too many. That's I know that to be true. We use too many, and we should have a structured program to reduce the number of chemicals that we use.
So what I'm hearing is that we have the ability to create an inventory of
Yes.
what we know.
I am much more comfortable with that
Okay.
approach, yeah.
And I think that would be the important first step for Barnstable
Yes.
County to take. And at this point, we haven't discussed it as commissioners, but I believe that we need to take a first step that stays with what we have the ability to do. I know that, or I've been told that when you looked at the potential of, let's see, of trying to regulate and perhaps taking some type of action beyond the ability of the regulatory authority with the utilities,
Yes.
that it was made quite clear that because our ability, I think the lawyers would, our ability to prevail was limited by the authority that gave them the permission to do what they're doing.
Well, yeah, there were two legal issues that came up when I looked at exercising the DCPC option against NSTAR specifically. One of them was exactly that. The likelihood of success on appeal based on certain preemptions that they have as a public utility was not in our favor. And the other legal issue is that we were clearly holding NSTAR to a higher standard than other institutions, public institutions, municipalities, homeowners, and that that really was not going to be a successful way to try to sustain an appeal of any action that we took at NSTAR. So there were two fairly obvious reasons why that action against NSTAR, in my opinion, and the opinion of our Commission Council, would have been unsuccessful.
Okay, but so far, we have a level of cooperation from NSTAR.
Very much so, yeah.
Okay, and then the next step, perhaps a path that we might look at, is whether or not, given that, and I think that this is what the intent of Representative Turner's, Clan Turner's bill that I've heard about, would be that perhaps NSTAR would be inclined to negotiate with the budget that they have to perform this task, and perhaps using some of the management resources that we have. And I think of AmeriCorps because the original intent of AmeriCorps was to provide a plan of environmental management for the towns. Is that perhaps by working in that direction, we might even be able to see some survival of AmeriCorps by a transfusion of let's say of money, to look at what I would call not a mechanical, let's say, affect, but maybe a manual extraction plan, because I think that one of the alternatives that we have to present to people is this is what it would take if we had a strictly manual extraction program versus, as was discovered when you did the when you reported on what happened at the Mass Turnpike, that the outcome would be that perhaps you could not have a completely avoid it. Of course, I'm very concerned about the issue of hormone effects on this. We've known about this for years and years and years, and I think it was Dr. Soley who brought who had my view on it, and I was quite affected by that because I have 8 grandchildren, 6 girls, and God knows that I've seen a marked change in in the development of young girls. I mean, I'm in the schools. I see that. It's incredible. So I know that something's happening, and I would hope that what we're doing is trying to avoid that, as much as we can.
Well, we are trying to avoid that, but the issue of endocrine disruptors and disruption, especially in public drinking water supplies, is an emerging science. And we try to stay on top of that, and it's actually been a fairly significant part of the wastewater discussion at times too, because when we, there have been organizations that have done sampling of the groundwater, they look at what shows up in it, and a lot of times the amounts that they find in greater than trace amounts are related to sort of common household items that we flush down the toilet on a regular basis. And you know, as we know, as part of the wastewater scenario, 85% of the households on the Cape have on-site wastewater disposal system. That all leaches into the drinking water supply. And so that's something that we're very vigilant about, but that issue goes far beyond the particular issue that we're talking about today as part of this vegetation management plan, and in fact is part of the issue. If we're not looking comprehensively at the threats, the potential threats, if we're not monitoring that science, if we're not regulating in a way that addresses that concern, then we are fooling ourselves that by isolating one issue and trying to deal with that issue, you know, we're creating the impression that we've made the Cape safer, when really we're whistling past the graveyard on a lot of the other threats that we know that are out there. And so, you know, my only plea is that we do something that's comprehensive and something that has a measurable outcome, because if we can't manage it, we can't manage it if we can't measure it. In order to measure it, we have to be able to aggregate that information, know what the potential threats are, and move forward in a way where we can make sure that we're safeguarding the population with the information that we know.
And the question comes, do you have the capacity to do that, and what resources do you need if you don't have the capacity?
There are two steps, I think, that should come next. And one is we had a discussion with the Department of Agricultural Resources over a year ago about a monitoring program. And some of that has been, that discussion has put off until we finish the mapping procedure, which is done now. That will allow us to locate test wells to get a baseline information about what's in the ground right now. That has to go forward. That has to go forward. And I'm frustrated. We've had discussions with the state about this throughout the last year. And you know, I'm frustrated by hearing from other people in the paper that, well, we should be doing this. Well, we have been negotiating with the state on a monitoring program for a year, and I expect that we're going to do it. Those resources need to come from the state in order to support that. But I think we are pretty far down the road on that. We haven't, nobody's really asked us about it. We talked about it a year ago and assumed everybody knew that we were doing it. So monitoring is number one. The second one is we have to do a comprehensive study that aggregates this information. The information as it's reported now, a lot of these pesticide applicators report in aggregate. If the locus of their company is off Cape, they report from an off Cape location. We have to come up with a better format for the collection of this information that is required to be reported, so that we know what the situation is on the ground. Because if we don't know how much we're using down here on an annual basis, we can't reduce how much we're using here on an annual basis, and it would be impossible for us to discern how much overuse there is. And so I think that aggregation of that information, that's going to be expensive too. But I'm committed to go and try to find the resources to have that outside consultant come down to help us aggregate that information and format a reporting system that will give us the ability to manage these things long term. And then additionally to that, if it's not ancillary to it, maybe it's a third point, is an education and outreach program. So
we can start that now.
Yeah, but it'll be more. I think it'll be more effective when we can start to graphically aggregate and demonstrate to people how much of this we're using and how much of it is really unnecessary.
If I can just, yeah, I just wanted to say a couple of things. You were talking about the mixed use, you know, of different chemicals. And I asked that to the scientists that presented to us from DAR and to others, and they were saying that that is all well and good, but once you mix two chemicals together, the possibilities or the you know, the number of this mixes with that, and how much is hitting, how much of this chemical is compounding with that. It's an infinite number of studies that you would have to look at. So that is why that information isn't always available. Not that it doesn't make a point. And, there is to a certain degree, there's a certain level of mistrust of the government. They feel that, 25 years ago, 30 years ago, DDT was fine, then we found out that it was not. So therefore, how can we believe this information? We can only go on what we have as the information that is given to us. The federal government, say a company like Monsanto, they have to go through all of these studies. They have a new chemical. They do all of the research. They do all of the peer reviews. They submit their years of work on this, and then it is reviewed on the federal level. That goes through years of study and review, and then those that are acceptable and the limits are sent to the states. Massachusetts is one of the most stringent states in the nation when it comes to this review. They put it through another several years review, and there are times they will take chemicals off the federally approved list and say that they're not appropriate for here, and if some of those are going to be used here, if there are certain conditions on how they're to be used, where they're to be used, and if they're near water bodies or sensitive areas, these are the practices and procedures. These are all very listed very clearly in any YOP that I've read. A YOP is a yearly operational plan that is submitted, and the vegetation management plan, which is VMP, is what, here is the plan and this is how we're going to carry it out. So those two documents are very detailed in all of the questions of what if this, what if that, how are you going to handle that situation, how are you going to handle this situation. They're very, very clear, and the ones I read from NSTAR, they're working within all the guidelines that they have to, all the regulatory bodies. So that is why it was easy for the committee to say, when you're looking at just straight facts, they are working within the law. When it comes to the endocrine disruptors, these are related more and more. People are very concerned about prescriptions being flushed down our toilets and that sort of thing. And I do think that the county has taken a lead in this with our hazardous and prescription pickups that we sponsor several times throughout the year, and the amounts that have been astounding, how many people have come with their pills for us to destroy them. Plus there is an education of how to destroy them yourself if you can't make it to this hazardous, and that's putting it in a bag and basically destroying them so that they can go into the incinerator and be burned, as opposed to being flushed down the toilet. So there are things that we need to get out to the public to help with this. There are many chemicals from many different sources, including our own excretions that are being put into our systems, and we have to sort of take a good look at this.
Did you have something more?
I think
I agree with Paul. I think we really need to do the monitoring and know exactly where we are and have the information.
Right.
Because I think that's something that we could go off in various directions and do things, but if you don't know what your starting point is, then you have no idea whether those programs are having any effect at all on the environment. And then we have to define the scope of what we can do, because there's so much. This is a huge issue. I've attended 3 or 4 different programs that Webner has put on about personal care products and endocrine disruptors, which a couple of years ago was really fairly new. And I know there were someone from California who came to Webner and talked about what they were doing in California to their wastewater treatment systems to try to capture those products in the system before they went into the ground. And the other thing I was thinking of was the program that Falmouth started years ago, back in early 2000s, the Falmouth Friendly Lawn Program, to get residents not to use those chemicals. And it had a great effect, because I remember, this is before 2002, because I was still on the Board of Selectmen then, and I remember we used to give out certificates to businesses, the golf courses, golf clubs, lots of organizations who took that on. And the whole idea of ecological landscapes was put out at that time too. And I happen to live in a place where we did an ecological landscape. And I can tell you, in 4 years, there has not been any fertilizer put on those lawns, nor even water, because the natural rain actually lets everything grow in an ecological way. So that's another approach that could be taken once we define what the scope of this is. But if you could get people on board and companies, the other thing is going to businesses and saying, look, we don't want you to sell these non-organic chemicals anymore, these pesticides and herbicides. We want you to use something else. And a lot of them agreed to set up a place in their store where they even had banners saying, this is the section, you know, for organic materials that you want to use on your lawn. So that's a lot of the education part, but it's also getting businesses involved, which you have to do if you want it to be successful going forward on the private side and the homeowner side.
And I would just, I agree with that approach completely. I think that's what we're trying to do. Instead of the county taking any resources that it has or that it can leverage and putting it into a specific scientific study of one chemical and the permutation that chemical can impact with others, to get an unknown result and put it into a federal and state process that it may or may not have any impact on, what we can do is put resources into identifying how much of this we use and reducing it, because I know if we reduce the amount that we're using currently, we are going to increase public safety. So, you know, that's my plea, is let's engage in a path forward that we know is going to make the Cape safer.
Well, an evolutionary process suggests that through reduction, you can it could and would lead to elimination, because the dependence upon a particular modality of, let's say, of treatment, you know, tends to be self-eliminating over time. So I think that, you know, that might be an appropriate place to start, because I don't think that we have the ability to say tomorrow all this is gone.
No,
but
no,
I think the approach of to avoid let's say the charge of gradualism is I think the first thing we have to identify clearly is how big the problem is,
yes,
which is the inventory piece. After we identify how big the problem is, then I think we have to encourage the part, and I think Pat has brought up an important point, that it has to have the support of the whole community. There are interested activists within the community that are suggesting approaches to this, but it needs to get the support of the whole community, which suggests that we need an education and outreach program to identify what good practice is. And I believe that that's also within the capability that we have between the Cape Cod Commission and AmeriCorps to come up with what I would call
all the more ammunition for Smart Cape Cod,
right,
and getting that data center going, so that all this monitoring information we collect has.
And even the transition from, you know, chemically enhanced lawns to more organic lawns, it has an economic development impact for the Cape, because I think we've got a lot of people down here who know how to do this, and I think we can develop a regional expertise.
And not for nothing, a program of manual extraction could lead to more labor-intensive kinds of activities, which could represent more, let's say, more jobs in that particular area.
If I may, just to one conversation that came up a lot was why can't we go in and manually extract? What if, like the town of Wellfleet has proposed to NSTAR, we will go in and do hand cutting, and there was even photo ops and all of this of people doing this last summer, going in and last spring, taking care of that vegetation so that it wouldn't have to be sprayed. They got a call from the Department of Natural Resources by saying, you don't really know what you're cutting. You could be cutting endangered species. You're going into habitats, so you're not trained, number one. And number two, that was an allowed practice, where if you were going by a home and the homeowner said, don't spray here, I'll take care of that tree and I'll make sure that this is managed and your power lines are going to be fine. If that was the agreement, they kept on going. Several years ago, we had a huge power outage in the Northeast, New York to the Northeast. That was because one of those homeowners who promised to do such a thing didn't fulfill their promise. A tree hit that line, and then they were liable for millions and millions of dollars because of that. So they can no longer have that type of relationship with the homeowner and average person. So that was the argument coming back there, and they are liable.
There is something else, and it has to do with the beneficial use of a, let's say, of a right-of-way. And up north, we own some property up in Vermont, and the power lines, transmission lines, are actually maintained by snowmobile associations. And the reason they maintain them because they want to have them clear so they can use them for that. We've had several requests, or I've seen in the paper, for people who want to have access to an area for dirt bike use, for example. Of course, that would raise hell with anybody who lives on it.
Okay, do you really want to get into that?
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to point out that if you go to, if you go up to Nessequaka, if you take a look at the, where the transmission lines are, nobody lives around there, and it's a fairly open and rough area. So, it suggests, I'm not suggesting that is one alternative, but there are uses that could be made if we had some beneficial use that, that came with it. And I see Leo, and this is Leo's opportunity to put your 2 cents worth in if you want about that.
Do I have to come up here?
Yes, you may,
Yeah.
please.
Well, if I may.
By the way, Leo Kokonis is the president of the Farm Bureau.
Yeah, but I'm here as a resident of, well, actually, no, I guess I'm here as a, yeah.
Well,
So
you're
you're
ready
also an
because of the
assembly
Farm
member
Bureau.
representing the town of Harwich, and you're a former member of the Cape Cod Commission, as we both serve on.
And formerly a member of the Vegetation Management Committee also. A
Representing
couple
the
of
Farm
things
Bureau.
in regards to the chairman's comments on NSTAR's abilities to do other things underneath their power lines. It needs to be known that NSTAR does not own any land, I believe absolutely none, on Cape Cod. I think the only land that they own on Cape Cod is actually where the transmission stations are, and there might be a number of them. The other right-of-ways travel over privately owned property. So the concept of asking NSTAR to come up with a plan alternative to either clay cutting with large machinery or this spraying of herbicides is basically inconceivable because they do not have the legal right to do that. I have approached NSTAR to look at possibly putting goats and sheep on an area. Agricultural land is of a premium on Cape Cod. I have brought that to their attention. They are open to it. It is done in a number of other states. But they cannot do it here because the landowner is the one who actually has the permission to allow NSTAR to, or actually it would be the landowner who would be reaching the agreement with me if I wanted to put sheep there as opposed to NSTAR, because NSTAR does not own the land. So I'll use your scenario as a dirt bike track. NSTAR could not do that. If a landowner wanted to sublease or ask a dirt bike group if they wanted to come in and use their part of the land, I'm sure that that's something that could be looked into. But people have to understand where NSTAR's position is in this. They do not have the legal authority to bring in a third party to do anything on this land.
Leo, and I'm going to support what you say, because up north, I was asked, because I had a transmission line going through the back of my property, as to whether or not I had any objections to snowmobiles using it. So,
Right.
yeah, there's some, but the point is that perhaps it's a question that needs to be put on the table so that people have an opportunity to decide whether or not we use resources from people who get a beneficial interest, and for the price of that that benefit would be willing to make an investment in maintenance in order to do that.
And I guess with that, I will tell you that it is being looked at by a number of different groups. I won't specifically think there's a dirt bike group that's looking at anything, but I've certainly been approached by a number of different agricultural uses of the land, and by a couple of groups that want to work not only with me personally, but with Farm Bureau to find people who are interested in doing other things on that open space as opposed to, again, having...
Okay.
You
Then
mean
the only thing I would ask then is that you communicate with Paul as he looks at this.
All the time.
Yeah. You mean like having a sheep graze there?
Absolutely.
Goats.
Goats, rather?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where sheep shall safely graze.
Sheep eat grass, goats eat
All that other stuff.
leaves and wooded plants. And wooded plants is what NSTAR is concerned about because they're the ones that grow into trees.
And they don't have any issue with that? If
NSTAR doesn't?
Yeah, if the goats were there.
NSTAR, only issue would be NSTAR would be that they have access to the property, that if there are any fences or gates put up, that their equipment be able to get in. Again, if the land is privately owned, there are many situations. In Harwich, we have a couple. I can tell you a couple of different towns that have people who live and own land under power lines, and their horses graze under there. The only issue is the fencing and making sure that NSTAR has the ability to, again, go in and service the poles if they need to.
I think Ron Smolowitz in Falmouth has already made that agreement with NSTAR, and he has his goats out there as we speak. I'm pretty sure he has already done that in the last few months, is my understanding.
Yeah, I mean, that's been a discussion. And I think you can use
Yes,
electronic
pretty much
fencing
fine.
now, but then you got to move the grazing
Okay.
area.
Yeah.
So
anyway,
it sounds like this is not a hopeless situation. It sounds
No,
like
it's not
there's
a
a lot of
hopeless
situation.
a lot
In
of what
fact-
I'd call opportunities
Yeah.
to look at a more holistic view of coming up with a solution that could be workable and would meet what a lot of
Yeah.
people's concerns are.
Monitoring the comprehensive review and aggregation of information, education and outreach. And the other thing I would say is that we're still talking to NSTAR about what's going to happen this year. No decision's been made yet. You know, but the acrimony associated with some of the stuff over the last few months has made those negotiations more difficult, not less difficult. So I think we just have to sort of wait and
Let's
see.
talk
how
a little
it
bit
goes.
about where the source of that acrimony is coming from. Is it coming from the individual towns? Is it coming from landowners, or is it coming from activists? Where is the source of this? And the other more important thing, for if I were still working for NSTAR or Boston Edison, for example, is how much weight does that have in terms of the mandating that NSTAR comply?
Well, listen, I think NSTAR has really tried to be a good neighbor in the way that they've gone about the process.
Everything in the report
over the
indicates
last
that
year.
to be true.
Because they could have gone and sprayed last year. There's nothing that we could have done to stop them. And it's false for anybody to think that was a possibility, and they didn't. So I think that they have been a good neighbor, and I hope that they will continue to work with us instead of reading the paper and looking at, a big section of the Cape Cod Times. It's only publishing negative stuff about what's going on, and to look at some of the spin that comes out that I think made some assertions that the ad hoc committee was going to do some sort of original science on risk management, which I don't even know where that
Spare me
that
from
came
the
from.
interpretation of the Cape Cod Times.
Okay,
with
well
regard to
then what
things.
about 11 towns that have signed on to a letter? Many of those towns who have licensed pesticides applicators. And some of those towns that have recently been permitted to use herbicides in their ponds.
Yes.
I mean, it's, at some point, I think from NSTAR's perspective, the hypocrisy leads them to believe that any sort of middle ground or creative approach would not be.
Are you
would not be
suggesting
fruitful.
there's a political tinge to the letter that we got from the towns?
I'm suggesting some of the towns didn't even know what they were signing on to, quite frankly.
Well, if I can just speak
I
to that
think
for a
there's a-
second. I'm sorry.
Is this right?
We as county commissioners have an obligation, and I think as elected officials, to look at what is being requested and what are the unintended consequences of a response. And it was referred to, the town council of Barnstable signed on to this, their health board didn't. And the doctor that heads their board of health said, I don't see the science of telling me definitely that there is not a report here saying that this is detrimental. I am not going to give a knee-jerk response to this without knowing all of the facts. And I think as elected officials we have that responsibility to look at all of the effects, all of the impacts, and the unintended consequences. As I stated earlier, if we placed a ban last year, and we would be hurting many people.
I think that we have to remember what the limits of our authority
Exactly.
is with regard to this matter. And I think we've clearly spoken to that, in this conversation. I think that what we're trying to encourage is within our ability to monitor and measure and come up with what I call an inventory of that shows the volume of the material that's being used, and collect information that is available from other sources as to what the what the elements within the materials that are being used and what is known about the toxic effects.
Well, I think that's a good point, and I like the way that you put it. We do have to be upfront in everything that we do with the limits of our authority. But there is no limit in our leadership on this issue.
That's right.
But leadership is difficult, and there's a big difference between leading and pandering. And I think that has been a line that's been blurred over the last 6 months on a lot of these issues too. We have to deal with facts, we have to deal with a reality, and we have to move in a way that we know is going to be effective to protect public safety.
Okay, now Maureen, I'll just say to you that under the art of war that we both learned, to avoid a battle is to win a battle.
Let me just say too, I think over the past year, the moratorium, I think, had a tremendous effect on getting people together and working together on what the issues are, defining them, and as we're doing today, trying to really look forward to where are we today, what is the situation, and where are we going to go, what action steps. I think resolutions, what they do is they create a huge awareness, an additional awareness, and I think that's what these resolutions have done. I think if I support a resolution, I always want to know exactly what I'm supporting and what is the effect it's going to have. And I think the effect of the resolution that many of the towns adopted, whether they knew what they were doing or not, did create awareness and did help to push it forward even further. Whether everything that is asked for in the resolution can happen, we don't know that yet, but we certainly want to work toward that. And I think that's what we've discussed today. We want to work toward, toward providing that environment that we know we have to have.
But I think we have to be, in the political process at times, it's too easy to sign a letter, to write a letter, to file a bill that makes people feel like you're doing something when you're not really doing anything.
Exactly.
And that's the difference, I think, between pandering and leading on an issue. What we've suggested is a way to put information together, to use what we know how to do, to be able to quantify this problem so that we can then develop ways to reduce the problem and increase public safety. I think that's leadership.
Then at this point, I think we have a clear suggestion as to what the next step would be to have some sort of an outline from you as to what this program should look like. And I think that would suggest an outcome, and that would determine, let's say, the character of the ongoing study that would follow on. Perhaps the committee that was suggested to continue to look at that would be informed by what our resources tell us we have the ability to do. And then at that point, I think we could perhaps visit the issue of that.
First we have to look at the plan before we even talk about
it.
We may not even need a committee.
Yeah.
We may need a consultant, or we may need some other vehicle to move this forward.
Then we're all in agreement on that we need to have it, and I believe that Paul is in a position to give us that.
We always have to solve all.
Well, not a solution.
Well,
if you give me 2 weeks, I think I can come back to you with the outline of a plan that is quantifiable and that will produce a positive result.
And at that point, perhaps we could visit the idea of whether or not we need, in addition to that, a continuation of the subcommittee, or whether or not the plan suggests what resources would be
Paul will
involved.
have that in his.
I'll tell you right now where I think a committee of sorts and where organizations like Green Cape could be very helpful. And this is in the education outreach, the design of that program, and the discussion of alternative methods. There's no question that we have a lot of expertise here on the Cape where they could be helpful.
All right, so I think we've come to a point where I think we need to to stop this discussion and then wait for Paul to return.
And as I say, I think that it's just unfortunate that the focus was on that last motion and not looking at that it was really recommendations of steps forward, and it wasn't an ultimate decision. That wasn't the purpose of the committee, nor was it the intention to take away the hard work of that committee. So for that, I want to thank everyone. You know, we sent out invitations to all of the people, basically who they have an interest, they're stakeholders, because somewhere in they're representing people who do have who apply chemicals and or they've been down this road before. We had the Mark Begleys and different people at that table. I know that the Golf Association is very willing to work with us in any way they can. Everyone at that table was, and everybody was very
thoughtful. We know there are a
thoughtful.
lot of agencies that are willing to work
But
with us.
people did not go in with,
We'll find that
you know,
out.
there was a lot of accusations made after
Well,
that
I wanna-
committee. And I just want to be able to
let's
say that
move
the
on from that.
integrity of the people there were there for the
I-
good of
okay.
the region.
I'm gonna
And if I just may state that, Bill, on behalf of those members, because everybody has been vilified in one way or another, that they were there for self-interest, and they have not been. They were there and they came and they did very hard work and had to come to very difficult decisions.
Then I think that at the very least, we should compose a letter
So-
expressing our thanks. And I think the direction that you have, are you clear on what we're asking you
I
to
am.
do?
And we'll have our agenda posted for 2 weeks to,
Yeah.
Okay, to cover that.
to
And
cover
Yeah.
Bill,
that.
did you have anything else?
Well,
And there's other-
again, I know it's
Yes.
been said before, but I think it needs to be repeated again. First of all, as a member of that committee, I want to stand and tell you that I was very proud to serve on that committee. I felt that I was the low dog on the pole, that there were certainly people there that were educated, involved in science. There were people there from organizations that strongly do their homework and have positions on things. But we as a committee worked for 6 months with really virtually no arguments, no fights, no finger pointing. It was a proud moment for me to be working there. I'm sorry, Bill, if I may, I would like to finish because I think it needs to be said publicly. It really does. Okay. Then we came out with a document at the end, which was voted on by virtue of majority rules. There were some that voted against it. There were some that voted for it. But the fact is the majority voted out some specific items. It's unfortunate, and I will say it again, as Ms. Lyons has stated, the only one thing that came out is NSTAR gets green thumb. In nowhere in this white document does it say NSTAR gets green thumb. There's some specific requests in here. The committee has asked you people to further study this. It was evident very early on that what you were asking us to do was impossible to do in that short of a time frame. We decided as a committee to focus our discussions specifically on herbicides and specifically on NSTAR's right-of-way, not the general impact of the entire Cape, which I believe, personally, needs to be looked at. And I think the committee does by asking you to continue this research. Not only that, I mean, there was even the final motion that everybody seems to point fingers at was not actually published in its entirety, because it states that if you people follow motions 1, 2, 3, and 4, and the Cape Cod Commission is done with their mapping, only at that point does the implementation of their integrated master management plan become okay. You need to go back and see what those suggestions were in 1, 2, 3, and 4. I would hope that this committee would consider, as recommended by the management committee, to write a letter to ask for an update. Hey, it may not go anywhere, but we're asking you to take that stand. The other thing, again, is creating that subcommittee through the Cape Cod Commission. I think it's imperative. The other document, again, what happens is we get into these public meetings and we touch on things. There were some excellent points made by members of this committee, which we ran out of time to look into. One specifically was that some pesticides are virtually banned on residential use.
Right.
Yet, a right-of-way runs through a residence. Well, you know something? I think it became, this is again a personal opinion, it became that the committee ran out of time. We were asking legal questions. Well, what supersedes what? That's why that specific motion was asked to be forwarded to, once you guys establish another committee to look into it further.
Right.
The recommendations of the Edison Society. We didn't have the time left to actually see that presentation. So it wasn't that it was said, well, that's crazy, or that's good, we support it. We didn't have the time.
Leo, is there anything in what we've talked about today that says that the committee did not do good work and it does not have our appreciation?
Not that's being said by you people and by this, by certainly the commissioners, but certainly by the public. And I'm taking the opportunity now, because we are on camera and there is press here. The public needs to be informed of exactly the procedure, and that white page needs to be read, distributed, read, and understood in its entirety before people comment on it. I mean, the fact of a person who voted to have NSTAR cease and desist their herbicide spraying to say to me, well, we don't do it in our town, and then I find out that they in fact are using a product which is called Produce, which is used by many towns across the Cape, and Produce actually has its main ingredient, glyphosate, which is one of the ingredients that we were talking about at NSTAR. The other one that's being used by a number of towns across the Cape. These towns that signed this document and said, please do not use herbicides on our right-of-ways, they're using a product called Razor Burn. Razor Burn, active ingredient, glyphosate. So there is a lot of information out there, and a lot more that needs to be done. And I'm hoping, again, I think there was a lot of negative press. Unfortunately, our last meeting may have been our most, if you want to use the term, explosive, but please do not weigh what happened for the last 6 or 7 months on 1 or 2 days of some misunderstandings, some miscommunications, and some maybe disagreements. Because that's not what the committee deserves.
Leo, thank you. But remember, the county commissioners are the ones that recruited the committee, put it in place, and the county commissioners, I believe, share my opinion that we're grateful that the committee did meet and did look at these issues. And I think that you've heard in the discussion we've had here today that we are looking at a next step, and we're looking at it based upon the resources that we have that could inform what a sustainable solution, which would lead to a sustainable solution. So I think that all those good things are indeed in line and are and we're moving towards the kind of thing that you're intending.
I think maybe Sue Phelan might want to.
Yeah, she had raised her hand.
Oh,
I know that you saw that Leo did, but you might not have
see
seen
her hand. Do you have something to add, Sue?
Yes,
You can come
my
up.
voice is a little bit
You can come up here. We might hear you a little bit better. And please identify yourself before.
Yeah, my name is Sue Phelan, and I live in West Barnstable, and I get my water from a private well.
Okay, but are you here in what capacity?
I'm here in my capacity as Director of Green Cape and former member of the Ad Hoc Committee on Risk Analysis Vegetation Management.
Okay.
And so I understand that there was not enough time to do a lot of the research that we wanted to do. However, if you're not going to do risk analysis, then don't call the committee, the Ad Hoc Committee on Risk Analysis Vegetation Management. There were a lot of opportunities where we could have called people in from Boston, people that have a lot more understanding of this. None of us at the table are experts. And I should mention that you were talking about the Carver soils. All of those numbers were models. They weren't actually tested in soil itself, and Carver soil is just a type of soil that supposedly exists on the Cape. However, we have a lot less organic material than that which is designated Carver soils. It was purely a model. It wasn't actual testing of herbicides in soil. Okay. Just to make that clear. There are so many things I could comment on, but I just want to limit my comments very much so. I did notice, I'm looking on the website, that that I have written to the committee and shared with members does not appear on the website. So I think it's important to have it there, as it really goes through the very specific problems with each herbicide or herbicide mixture. And the fact that the krenite, which is the herbicide that NSTAR uses in the most volume, has never been, a risk assessment has never been done for residential use. It just happens that rights-of-way and residential property happens to be the same thing here on the Cape. NDAR states that they consider it a right-of-way. However, people living there are paying taxes on it.
You might tell people what NDAR stands for.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mass Department of Agricultural Resources, who are the regulators of NSTAR as related to the herbicide use. So the human body is going to recognize the impact of any herbicide it's exposed to, whether or not it's registered for use for rights-of-way or registered for use on residential properties. And I think it's really important that they're using this without it having had the aggregate health assessments according to the US EPA, by the way. And that all of that appears in this document, which I have submitted to the committee, but which is not on the website, and I'd be happy to give it all to you all.
If you will make sure, we will make sure that
Thank
that is
you.
on there today.
I'm sure it was
if we
just
have
done
to scan
oversight.
it.
Do you have this available electronically?
Yeah,
Why
I
don't you
do.
just send it to...
Well, I have already sent it. It just
Okay.
has not
You did?
appeared.
And it's under that title.
Mhm.
Okay, and the website is listed on here? Is it, were you probably printed that off from,
Oh, that's my own personal
that's your own personal
document.
copy?
Okay, one
Let us
I
make
did
a-
send it to Kara several weeks.
Okay,
Oh,
I'll make sure, sometimes those things do, I
So could you take
apologize.
care of that?
But yes, I'll make sure, if I could allow this to be scanned, just to
Sure.
be sure that we have it, and then if she has it
It's
on the
yours.
direct,
Yeah.
I'll do that right now before, because I'm gonna have to.
Okay.
Excuse me.
I just would like to close in saying, I'm not going to go through each point that I have a problem with, but I think that it was premature for the committee to come to any recommendation to support the implementation of NSTAR's herbicide plan. If you don't have all the information, if you don't have time to look into the endocrine society's recommendations, if you don't have time to study the krenite, then you don't have a conclusion. And that was my objection. And then at the last minute, there were changes to be made, which were all being done on email, where we should have had another meeting if there were any changes to be made. So,
Well,
thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Can I just say, are you supportive of our plan going forward now in terms, well, maybe when Paul comes back with a plan?
Yeah, I'm
You
not
probably-
really clear on what the plan
Well,
will
we-
be, but
we
it
don't know
certainly
either.
we don't know either
it
because we're
doesn't-
asking to put
right,
one
yeah.
together.
Yeah.
But the intent is that we take a look at our resources and find out exactly how big the problem is Cape-wide, as opposed to just focusing on one part of it. There are 400 square miles on the Cape, and the 150 by 200 foot area that we're talking about is a fraction of that.
I understand that, really the herbicide and other chemical use really needs to be looked at on a wider basis. However, I kind of think of this sometimes as being the sandbox mentality where you say, well, he's doing it, so why can't I? I think the bigger user here, I think is single user, okay? I'm not talking about aggregate uses, because single user here is possibly NSTAR. And they're using the types of compounds that you and I could not go to the supermarket or Walmart to buy.
I would
They're
suggest to you
stronger.
that
They're
NSTAR
stronger.
and the rights of way of the railroads
Mhm.
probably are equal in terms of, in terms of area. And we are looking at 400 square miles that we're concerned with as county commissioners. And although it's important to understand what is being used on the right-of-way, it's also clear to me that our responsibility is to all of us. So the risk
Absolutely.
assessment, as I recall, was to find out if there was an immediate risk to life and and property based upon current practice. And one of the things that the committee did come out with is that there's no there's no what I call substantial evidence that says that we are in an immediate risk with regard to present practice.
I don't think we proved that, and I
Well,
don't think
that
there
was one
is
of the,
that
that
evidence.
came out of one of the recommendations that they made, and that was one of the assignments that they were given. I don't believe that, I don't believe I read anything in their report that said that we were at risk based upon what they looked at. So that's one of the reasons why I believe it's important to look at a next step, which would involve what I call resources that are under our control, that we have confidence in, that would, that would respond to our ability to measure and to do an inventory on what is present and what we know.
But we also want recommendations that are beyond our control.
Based
Maybe
on
we-
the information that was given at the meeting, no one could say there is no health impact either.
Right.
You couldn't say it was safe, but you can't.
And that's true. And,
Either way.
and as you just said, the biggest contributor is possibly NSTAR.
Biggest
That's why
single
it is
contributor.
the single contributor is possibly. That's why it is very good for us. It would be in our interest to take a look at all of the contributors here and to
I'm not saying
take a look
that,
at
but
the
you should. I'm not
impacts.
saying you should.
And I'm not disagreeing with you. I think you've done a great job because look at where we are. And I do want to just point out on behalf of the county has picked up this issue and has done more with it and has addressed it more head-on than all of the meetings and all of the photo ops that have gone on in a delegation. We've asked them for assistance in getting money. We've asked them for legislation, which has just finally been filed. We've asked them for assistance in this, and it's really been, us out there on our own. So even now, I think that if the delegation can help us with Mass Department of Agricultural Resources, thank you, in obtaining these funds so that we can go ahead, I think that's where a lot of our pressure could go forward on, and
Okay.
I'd appreciate your help on that, Sue.
And I would like to just clarify.
There's your copy. That's
Thank
the
you.
scan.
I
Thank
would
you.
like to just clarify that as of last night, 13 towns have signed on to the resolution.
That's great.
Paul, do you have something?
No, other than, I would agree that even some of the questions, until we know what the situation is, like answering the question, is NSTAR the single largest contributor to the issue here, then even some of the questions are premature. So hopefully what I hope to respond to you in 2 weeks is a process where we can finally get the baseline information that we need. And I think a lot of the unanswered questions that remain as part of the ad hoc committee report, we can identify a process by which we can get to some of those answers. So.
Sounds good to me.
It's just one copy.
Is there any, I'm sorry,
I don't even know if I can ask a question as a member of the public.
who are you?
My name is Beth Marcus. I'm a resident in the village of Centerville, the town of
Oh,
Barnstable.
yeah, you're the beer maker.
My husband and I own Cape Cod Beer. We certainly have
I like the
concerns
pale
about.
ale.
Huh?
I like the beach blonde.
Well, I'm glad you like our beer. We really appreciate that, and we're certainly worried about protecting our water supply, which beer, 95% of beer is made of water. We're very late to the game in terms of understanding it. I completely appreciate the thoughtfulness that it appears that everybody, including members of the committee, Sue had reached out to us. Several other people that were involved have reached out to us. My question as a citizen sitting here is, I'm not exactly sure who's managing the relationship with NSTAR. I think it's great that we want to study the bigger picture, but I feel like the bulldozers are coming, or the sprayers are coming. So who's managing that piece of it? And it's great that we want to look at everything, but what's the next step in terms of that?
Well, I have been in touch with NSTARs, and I've had many discussions with them.
Who's
last
So
week.
who's managing
But
it?
who are the
question
people
is-
from NSTAR that are managing
No.
this?
Who from Cape Cod?
Well, I would
is-
think that Paul and I have probably had the most conversations
Well,
with NSTAR.
as far as the management piece, remember, rights of way go through individual towns.
That's right.
Individual
Right, but are
towns
they
have
loading
re-
up their backpack sprayers right now,
Well,
getting ready to
they've
go?
not
or-
issued YOPs yet, as
No,
far
no,
as
no.
I'm
But
concerned.
individual, remember, if a right of way goes through a town, the town is responsible for
For notifying.
oversight in that particular town. Am I right, Leo?
Yeah.
Actually, any pesticides and herbicide defoliant is considered a pesticide. that's being applied by a licensed pesticide user in the state of Massachusetts. They're required to do certain things. I'm going to use the town of Howard, for example, because I live there. If NSTAR decides they're going to apply a herbicide to the right-of-ways in Howard, the first thing they would do is notify the town of Howard, and then and they would tell them that within the next 3 weeks we're going to be doing from point A to point B. And then the licensed applicator would be required to come out and actually put signs where the gates are for people who enter that way, or notify the houses along that right-of-way so that in case children are playing out underneath the power lines and all that. And then they would put backpacks on and walk through, and according to their integrated pest management plan, these are backpack applications of spot spraying. And then once that is done, depending on the label of the product that they're using, the signs would remain in place for maybe 1 day or 2 days, and then they would be picked up by the applicator, and then it would continue to the next town. So as NSTAR enters, or anyone, not just NSTAR, but any large applicator like this, if that's basically the laws that they have to abide by. Now, the direct answer to your question is who's superseding, or who's watching all this. It would be the state through the Massachusetts Pesticide Board, because they're the ones that get the report forms and are the ones that actually have stamped on to the integrated pest management plan.
So,
and I encourage anyone who doesn't understand what NSTAR is doing to get a copy of their plan, because again, a lot of people don't understand the entire plan and the intentions of their plan specifically, which is in fact to reduce the amount of herbicides used within a 5-year period. And it's essential, if you're going to comment on them, to understand and be fair, understand what they're using and how they're doing it.
Where do you find the plan? You can
I believe it's
find that plan on the Mass Department of Agricultural Resources. There is a link on our website to that, and it will go through, you will see management plans in general. It has every town. It has their management plan on there, and in the state of Massachusetts, so you just zero down, and then we'll have companies that are filing, because there's companies all over the state that are filing their vegetation management plan, and then their what's called a YOP, their yearly operational plan. So the vegetation management plan is the overall plan. They file that every 5 years, and then they file a yearly operational plan of this is how we're carrying out our plan, and this is where we're going to be, and how it is going to be implemented. So all of those details and all of the questions are there.
Okay, so a question you might ask the town of Barnstable, who have signed off.
No,
on
we-
this.
We're not going to talk to
Leo, I was going to say, the filing with the town is purely notification. It's not permission.
Absolutely.
That's
Purely
right.
notification. As I mentioned, even the notification of the neighbors, and when someone physically puts a sign up, many times you've seen what was mentioned before was a lawn care company where they'll have these little yellow signs on the lawn. Believe me, that's not because they're doing it to advertise. They are required by law as notification to let people know that a product has been
And how about
applied.
at the state level? Is there any state review or public review of that plan, or is that pretty much...
There's a review of the plan prior to being implemented. There's also a review of the plan as the reports go back to the state as to what was used, how many gallons were used, what the mixture was, and where it was applied, and there's a review on that. Any licensed pesticide applicator is required by law to file when they do in fact use things. And in regards to the integrated pest management plan, if any of you are really interested and get on the computer, you will realize too that not only the towns and municipalities have many plans on there, but it is required by the state of Massachusetts that all schools, in fact, post their integrated pest management plan. And that's something that people should be aware of, because all schools use products like Raid and ant traps, and some use herbicides, some use fertilizers. So as your interest is peaking and you're going through the website, you may want to know why a school is on there, and it is required by law.
And to answer the question, that the plans, as they're submitted, do have to go through EPA and MDAR review. And that's, once they're accepted, they're put on that website.
Okay.
I think there was a
unfortunately,
more specific
I'm sorry.
question there. Just last year, the NSTAR publishes their yearly operating plans to the towns. The towns have a comment period. Some of the towns felt that they didn't have the capacity to respond to the yearly operating plan. They asked the commission to get involved, we did, and that's where this mapping procedure
Yeah,
came from.
to stop, yeah.
There. But we have continued discussions with NSTAR, trying to help some of the towns respond to the YOP. They have not reissued a yearly operating plan now, so we haven't seen a draft YOP, so there's nothing to comment yet. But those negotiations between the Commission and NSTAR are definitely ongoing, and so I wouldn't, they wouldn't spray probably until June anyway if they were going to do that, so there are still probably a couple of months, but that's ongoing, so I wouldn't necessarily feel like it was an impending thing at this point. So we continue to negotiate.
Thank you very much. Can I, before, and I don't want to leave, we have I have an appointment that we have to go to, so, do I need to be here, Dave?
I hope you hear what I have to say.
Okay, yes, all right, I'll stay in.
Jim? I'm Dave Schrofer, a former selectman in Eastham, and I sat in the meeting that started this whole ball rolling when they came in, and we used the comment period to raise some questions. We asked for the research on the chemicals that they were applying. We were given that research, and it staggered me that much of it was 1978, 1983, 1991, 20, 30 years ago that this research was done. Techniques have changed, laboratory changes have been made, but they also used model samples of earth, which is a common thing that they do in a laboratory, and it doesn't match the soils that we have here. I'm not a technical person, and I'm not here to talk to you about technical chemicals. I am here to say that when we started that ball rolling, we had the belief that the resolution that we passed had only to do with sending out a message that we were unhappy with it, but that they were in compliance with federal law in applying some of these chemicals. We wanted to start the ball rolling from the standpoint that one voice makes a difference. One town makes a difference. One town can affect the county, and the county can affect the state, and the state can affect the government, the federal government. That's the ball we wanted to start rolling, and it has started. What troubled me terribly was somewhere between a dozen and 13 towns had signed a similar resolution that Representative Peake, I think, was helpful in getting submitted around, as were the commissioners. Is that message was, you know, stop until we can figure this out. The relationship between chemicals and mental health is untested and unproven, but suspicious. One of the things that concerns me, and that is the most logical thing that has not been addressed, is there are little flags put up. Why? There are warnings listed. Why? There is an approval process. Why? Because these are chemicals, they are dangerous, and we have a sandy soil, not a laboratory sample soil. And sandy soil allows absorption of material at a much faster rate and a much more in-depth rate because there's virtually nothing to stop it. In some cases in Eastham, there's some clay, and clay will stop those kinds of things. Unfortunately, the water sits on top, the aquifer sits on top of the clay in many cases. So we're actually drawing water that is only filtered by sand. My concern is the towns gave a clear message, and the vote of the one issue, I agree very much with the approach of let's do research, let's find out what's going on, let's find out what the true impact of these chemicals are on our health and on our water systems. But the trouble was that it clearly was a statement with a group that was not evenly divided. There weren't an equal number of people who were users with an equal number of people who were concerned about the environment. And had there been, then the vote would have either been a tie or would have gone one way or the other, depending on if one side could convince the other. That's not what happened. I agreed with the way it was, the structure of bringing the users together to talk about it, because NSTAR is not the only applicator. It's all over the case. Every golf course can tell you that. Every town can tell you that. So the issue was, if that's what's going on and you brought all those people together, the one thing they couldn't vote on is what impact NSTAR was having. I don't think they could give permission. I don't think they could imply that. And it's not so much that the newspapers didn't accurately report all the other things that I felt were good and valuable and appropriate. I actually think that what started in Eastham a year and a half ago is really going to have an impact on the whole Cape exactly as we intended, if this research is done and what Mr. Niswick is in charge to bring forward. So I'm very satisfied with that. The only issue is what happened when the vote was taken that essentially said NSTAR has a, quote, green thumb, was something they didn't get, and something that everybody thinks they did.
Right. And if I just may, I had addressed that a little bit earlier, and when that discussion came up, people felt that that was a political decision. But that wasn't the decision. That was not the job of the committee, was to sign on or not sign on to that letter. It was to get the facts as much as we could gather in the time frame that we had, with recommendations going forward. And from those facts, we couldn't say that NSTAR's plan was out of compliance. So that is where it looks like there's an endorsement of their plan. It's not a green thumb up and it's not a green thumb down. But as the facts, and if they stood in a court of law, they would be looked at as doing what within the boundaries of the law, and they are making every effort they can, even within the allowed amounts of the state, and even if they're done on modeling, and the modeling is done on conservative, and you can hear the scientists. Does it mean to call anybody that they're telling untruths? So from how we were presented this information, that was not our job. That is for us to tell the county how to vote, how not to vote, or how to take this issue up. This was information to go forward. And that is all, and it was painted as, the papers can paint it as they want, and people can interpret it as they want, but that was not the intent, nor the outcome, or where it stops.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, no one in the towns is thinking that that's what was the purpose of that committee, nor is that what they thought the purpose of their letters were. The resolutions we were passing was to pause the process, which is partially successful because they haven't done a YOP yet, and then may not have time to do it this year. So some of the research that you want to do may get underway. And I fully understood and heard you say, and I've heard you in private conversations say, that wasn't the purpose. But in my view, there should not have been a vote on anything to do with NSTAR, because NSTAR's situation wasn't resolved.
Okay,
I agree with you. And
Excuse me.
if I may, just as the chair of that committee, I take responsibility for that. And if there's one thing I could have done differently, I would have done that differently, because it took the focus off of the work of the committee. And for that, I regret and I apologize, and I learned from it.
Okay.
And I stand corrected.
All right. Asked and answered. I think that we've come to the end of this discussion. I don't think there's anything more we can add to it. And I believe we have set a path.
And I have to go because I have a 1 o'clock appointment up in Boston. Thank you.
Well, we invite you back in 2 weeks. We're going to. We have Wellness Wiki is coming back in 2 weeks to give us a plan, an overview of where we need to go going forward on this whole issue, both with NSTAR and with all of the towns.
Oh, and while you're still in the room, could I have a motion to approve the
yes.
summary of actions?
I'll move to approve the summary of actions.
And I second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. We're back. Okay, we're now signing on the needs action. Do you have anything?
I do. I have a couple of things for you. I have a preliminary budget picture based on our conversation last week, so you can pass that to Pat. Pass one of those to Pat. So it looks like we are going to have about just under $25 million budget, $24,970,000. So I made those changes, and they are reflected there. So what I'll do is, you don't need to comment or do anything now. Just take a look at those. I will send you kind of the detailed budget pages. I know, Bill, especially, you like to look at those. We'll send you those. You can take a look at them, and then I can kind of go over what's in there next week, and I'll be pulling all the budget pieces
So when
together.
are we actually going to vote the budget?
It will be signed by you and go to the Assembly on, I believe it's March 16th.
March
the second
16th.
meeting of the Assembly in March.
Okay.
So I will pull all those pieces together, and I can go over kind of what's in there and what's not in there next week in a little bit more detail. And then I did finally, from the Department of Revenue, Division of Local Services, I did finally receive the new equalized valuation numbers. And as you know, the county tax and the Cape Cod Commission tax can go up 2.5% every year, which is reflected in the 2012 budget. but because the
Valuations
valuations
seller.
can change relative to each other in terms of the towns across the Cape, you see that based on the comparison of the 2012 county and Cape Cod Commission tax to the 2011 county Cape Cod Commission tax, there are winners and there are losers. And you see Barnstable's total percentage only goes up by less than 1%. Bourne goes up by more than 2.5%, and I would say Chatham goes up by almost 10%. The second highest is Brewster, going up by 6.38%. The biggest winner, or the biggest loser, depending on how you look at it, looks like it is Wellfleet, going down 3.76%.
Wow.
And that's all due to how the equalized valuation number is relative to each of the other towns and to the whole. So if your value, I think all of the values went down, but if your value didn't go down as fast as everyone else, then you end up paying a little bit more. That's Chatham's case. That's Orleans' case. Many of those. So that just gives you that picture. And then the
Orleans really went up. No, what was the highest one? Chatham?
The highest was Chatham, and Orleans I think is second, 8.12%.
So how does that affect us?
It doesn't affect us in terms of the county. It's all how the county tax and Cape Cod Commission tax is apportioned for that'll be for 2012.
Oh, it's how it's apportioned, not the total.
Not the total. The total went up 2.5% as it can.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that each town would think they're getting a 2.5% increase, but because the EQV numbers change, that's not always the case. Every other year, it's not the case.
So, okay, the columns, the headings are not quite over the columns?
No, exactly.
Okay,
yeah.
so just, okay, in my mind, move them over a little bit.
Yeah, on the 2012 ones.
Yeah, okay.
All right, and then so last but not least, I did want to mention that there is an event on Saturday, February 26th. You should have all received this. It's a thank you from the Barnstable County Human Rights Commission for their years of support for the Human Rights Commission on Cape Cod. It's thank you to the county. And it is on February 26th, Saturday, from 2 to 5 at the Katuitt Center for the Arts on Route 28 in Katuitt. You should have gotten that in your email the other day. It came on February 18th.
I had gotten that. I believe Beth had, I talked to Beth Albert. She said she was going.
And just
are you? Will you be going?
Yeah.
And I just wanted to mention that, of course, I've mentioned this before, but on Monday, the 28th, 4 to 6, there's the Public-Private Partnership Symposium sponsored by Senate President Murray. That's of course, Sandwich Town Hall. Yeah,
that's on March 1st?
That's February 28th.
28th, okay.
Monday.
That's at 4 o'clock?
4 to 6, yep.
4 to 6, and then Open Cape. Isn't the legislative, aren't they,
You're
Open
asking
Cape
me
is
something I don't know.
a presentation to the delegation at 1 o'clock?
I don't know.
Open Cape at the community college, do you have that?
Sounds vaguely familiar, but I just don't have the space on that one.
Yeah,
March 20, what?
I think it's the same day, the 28th.
it's the same day,
I think it's the same day.
the 28th.
28th of February or March?
February, Monday.
February.
Next Monday.
Next Monday.
And I have one last thing, and it's too bad that
We could
Commissioner Lyons is not
coordinate
here.
this afterwards.
It's a signature for an $85,000 grant from the state's Department of Housing and Community Development to, it's for the regional network to end homelessness, and it's for some innovation programs. This is from Beth, so I want to give you that.
Awesome.
We can sign
She must
on
be
the
thrilled.
side there. At least it's something, as you remember.
Yes.
It's not what we
It's
once
not
got,
everything,
but
but
it's
it's something.
So, and that's all I have.
Okay, I went to, the governor was here
Yesterday.
Tuesday, and I did see him down at the workforce board down at JTEC, and he was kind enough to ask me how things were going, and I told him we were in better shape than he was.
That's not, you shouldn't say that. You should always plead poverty and ask for money.
But he said everything was fine. I also suggested that since I'll be going down to the legislative conference for NATO, that perhaps he join me in asking his pal Barack to continue with CDBG funding support, and also, since he was there, to look at the training that was going on, that much of the training that is going on at JTEC that is producing, let's say, a pathway to employment is dependent upon federal funding, and that it would be, if he wants to see that to continue, we've got to continue to have support with that. So it was very nice of him to come. He participated directly in the GED sessions that were going on, and also spent some time talking to him. The other people that were there were Demetrius Atzelis and also Dan Wolf, Senator Wolf was also there. So there was, I was happy, that he was kind enough to come and look at something that is going on, that's trying to help people find employment, and also through the GED training to prepare them, make up for some of the voids in their preparation. So it was all, I thought it was all good. And one of the things that had come out of it in a side conversation with David Augustino, you know that we've had a licensed practical nurse program that's been run through the vocational schools. He made the point that based upon what CNAs are being paid, it's certified nurses' aides, that we need to find out if we could figure out a way to get a part-time LPN program going, because as good as the effect has been of compressing the time for going from a CNA to an LPN, in a 10-month period, is a full-time curriculum, and that if there was some way to have a pathway for, on a part-time basis, you'd have people that are really getting what I call, fairly marginal paychecks, an opportunity to go down that path that would double their income. So it was something that...
There was a program for LPNs.
Well, there is, but that's a 10-month full-time school program. What he's suggesting...
the program be part-time.
In other words, in addition to have a part-time program, because that program has been successful. We've produced quite a few LPNs who are populating and getting employment with a lot of the nursing homes around the Cape. He's approaching Cape Cod Healthcare to see if they have any interest, in supporting a part-time program. But his suspicion is that they're getting what they need out of the full-time program. But again, anything that we can do to reduce that, to allow people to continue to support themselves and still move towards improving their situation, I think we have to keep looking at. And when I go down to the legislative conference, I'm going to find out whether or not there's some understanding of the different kinds of training that should be made available to support what I would say an identified need that we have here. So anyway, that was that. Did you have anything, Pat? Okay. All right, well, I guess...
So I have, next meeting, March 2nd, I have start time 1 o'clock. I believe Tim Fryery from the farm is coming in. He wanted to talk to you guys about some things, update you about what's going on there. Then we'll have a budget overview. I'm going to go over what I gave out today, about kind of finalize the budget. And then on March 9th, do you have a preference on start time for the vegetative management plan? Anybody?
March 9th.
And I will contact Sheila, just make sure she's okay with it.
Okay.
So that's not an assembly day on this on the
there-
9th, so we can do whatever you want.
Was there anything else we were saying? Let's see, the 16th, we're looking at...
Yeah, I have to go back and review.
What's
Charter review.
V-card?
Charter review, I think. I'm sorry?
V-card. I always have these things in here and I wonder what they mean.
I don't know.
I don't either.
So anybody, and preference on start time for the 9th? Anybody care?
Oh, no.
Either in the morning or afternoon?
Oh, here, let's see what this says. V-card.
It's up to you guys.
Well, I would, on the 9th, I would prefer a meeting in the afternoon because I'll be coming back from DC.
Oh, all right.
That's fine with me.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'll propose maybe 1 o'clock?
Yeah, because that way I know that I'll be coming back, I'll be in Boston in the morning.
All right.
And that'll get me down here.
Okay. So we'll do 1 o'clock, start till 9 o'clock. And that'll be public so we can legislative management plan.
So 1 o'clock.
Yep. All right, good. And then, yeah, there's something on the 16th. I'll put together kind of an upcoming meeting schedule
And
once the budget is kind of clear. I think we can
And
do something on the 16th.
then next week, the 2nd,
Start time 1 o'clock.
1 o'clock.
1:05, we'll have Tim Fryery from the farm will be here. And then 2:05 or so, 2 o'clock, we'll do the budget thing.
Okay, so March 2nd, we're meeting at what time?
1 o'clock.
Okay.
And that's on a Sunday.
That's a Sunday day, yeah.
And the 16th would be
We'll get back to you.
9 o'clock.
No, 16th,
Oh, it's the
Assembly Day
20
is probably in the afternoon.
Now, the 23rd, that's when we have the Meals on Wheels, and that's 10 to 12. And that's not an assembly day. So we could meet, but we could meet better in the afternoon. 'Cause
Could do whatever
I
you
don't know
want.
if you're volunteering. I already volunteered to do the Meals on Wheels that day.
Tilting me into it.
Yeah, you have to do it.
Of course I'll do it.
Okay. So we could meet at 1 then on the 23rd.
Okay.
Now, do we go from there to do the Meals on Wheels?
Well, I do it in Falmouth. You probably do it in Harwich, right?
Yeah, so when do you do it, in the morning or the afternoon?
It's 10 to 12. It's the same, I think, everywhere.
Okay, I'll check, I'll take care of it, Howard. So
Yeah, because
have it-
it's really
have
the
it done.
dinner. I mean, it's the luncheon, which is
Okay,
really the dinner.
great. I'll check with Courtney, probably Barbara Foley. I'll check with her.
Okay, so we'll do, and I'll check to see what we'll have on the agenda.
Okay, then, is there any, besides finishing these signatures, is there any other business for us?
I have none.
Okay, then I will,
Move to adjourn.
thank you very much.